Welcome to this first session. We have Dr. Cath Thorlakson joining us, and she is going to be talking about the importance of mental health. So if you're interested in that topic, stay tuned for this next session because you're not going to want to miss it.
Hello everyone in the room and online. I am here to talk about mental health, and just to give you an idea of who you're listening to, my name is Cath Thorlakson. I am a psychologist and I'm from Edmonton. Right now I teach at Vanguard College, and I also do some private practice on this side. Some of my background, just so that you know, I've worked in mental health. I've done clinical counseling since 2000 and some pastoral counseling before then, and now I do it as a psychologist. So I'm going to talk about mental health a little bit, and if you can see the slide, it actually says mental health, and just above it, it says when the snowball gets too big. Because the thing with mental health is it tends to be a bit of a snowball. So when somebody starts going through stuff, unless we can kind of arrest it and slow things down, it can keep rolling, and the more it rolls, it can get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so one of the things that I like to do with people is kind of put us, not a stop, but start to pull us back up out of that rolling ball or snowball. Just a few statistics that I wanted to bring out. What I really wanted to find when I was doing a search was statistics now because of the pandemic that's happening. That really is not having a good impact on our mental health. So these statistics I'm gonna share come from 2018, and it will be interesting to see what it turns into after 2020 when we start recording things. So I'm just gonna read that first slide there. Center for Addiction and Mental Health said it's estimated that 1 in 3 Canadians will have a mental health problem at some point in their life. Many Canadians do not realize the impact that poor mental health has on families, communities, health systems, and the economy. Mental health is as important as physical health to a person's well-being, but understanding awareness of mental health is lagging far behind other health conditions such as cancer, diabetes, or heart disease. In part, this is because the information available about mental health is fractured, and in part it's because people do not want to talk about mental illness. For these reasons, it's difficult to see the full impact that poor mental health is having on Canada. So I found that in 2018, that statement. I would say that those stats are very different right now. And in fact, the next slide is going to show you a slightly different stat taken around the same time, probably from some different studies. But it's going to give really similar kind of feel in regard to the prevalence of mental health. So by 40 years old, 1 in 2 people have a mental illness. So that means that in this room, half of the people, by statistics, are going to have some kind of mental health issue going on currently. Online, same statistic. That's from back a couple of years. I wonder what that looks like now. And that information is yet to be found. We talk about the pandemic and the mendemic that is happening right alongside the pandemic. Because this is just being really not good for us. I just want to also mention, along with that, in regard to people that are from like 18 to about 40, the developmental stage that they're in is identity versus isolation. And intimacy versus isolation. If by the end of that stage they can achieve good intimacy, well-being will be supported. And so we've got this year-long thing that's been happening that has worked against that. And so I think it's particularly hard on the younger set. I do still think it's hard on those of us who are a different age range. Second statistic, in any given year, 1 in 5 Canadians experience mental health difficulties or addictions, so in any given year. In 70%, the onset is actually during childhood. So we tend to think of mental health, probably less so as time goes on, but we tend to think of mental health in terms of adults. Kids are suffering too, and we need to be aware of it. It's going to look different in kids because kids' language is behavior. And so when we see some of the acting out things and that kind of thing, I think we want to understand what's going on underneath the surface. What's the reason for the behavior? We need to understand that. People 15 to 24 years old are most likely to experience mental illness or another addiction or addiction. So that younger set is highly at risk, particularly right now. We usually see more often addiction in men, and in women we see more of the mood disorders. As I work with people, I'm seeing more and more kind of a mix of the two. I'm seeing lots of anxiety and mood stuff happening. It just, in my experience, I'm seeing a lot of anxiety, and it seems to be coming up a lot these days. The statement has been made that mental illness is the leading cause of disability in Canada. So you think about all the reasons why somebody would have to take time off work. Mental illness is the highest one. Stress leaves, just not able to do it anymore for whatever reason. So we have some work to do when it comes to mental health, and I think the work we have to do starts first with understanding, just understanding it. I want to talk a little bit first about resilience. And that has been called the type B personality, the hardy personality. We talk a lot about type A personality. And that one is worth thinking about as well, though I don't have a slide on that. So type A, that is the personality that is hardworking, possibly aggressive, pushes themselves, initiating, determined, and also on the list is hostile. I don't know that every type A personality has every one of those traits, but that personality is considered to be one that is most likely towards health breakdown. In further reading that I've done, it has been suggested that it's actually not that whole personality that leads us towards health breakdown. It's just one trait. And if I was in a great big group, I would love to ask people to guess. That one trait is hostility. When hostility is high, that's hard on our heart. That's hard on our health. And so something that we want to think about is what sits underneath that hostility. Because anger, hostility, frustration, all that stuff is there to protect us. And so there's usually something softer underneath there that's going on. So type A is okay, as long as we're not of a hostile, holding stuff in, and those emotions that get covered over, they get pretty hard on us, pretty unhealthy. So, and I'll be talking about vulnerability next time I come back. In the 80s, so back to the type B personality, in the 80s, Kobasa and his associates actually made some discoveries about resilience. And the things that they find, we still find being taught today. They noticed, first of all, that a variety of experiences, like difficulties, even trauma, we don't like to go through trauma. We don't want other people to go through trauma. We actually can end up feeling traumatized ourselves when we hear about trauma that people have gone through. But actually those hard things and the mix of good things and pleasant experiences creates in us a depth, a grittiness, a credibility in life, and actually helps to enrich us. So going through those hard things is not necessarily a bad thing. It's what we do with those hard things. I'm going to get into how we think a little bit as well and how that contributes to our mental health or well-being or not. So they found 3 traits that seem to have a protective effect. When we get going through stressful things, our immune system becomes more susceptible to health breakdown. And that's one of the concerns with stress. And they found that these are the 3 things that actually helps to protect a person against health breakdown. The first one is control. So especially in an environment like this, where we've lost control of a lot of things. We have to wear a mask over our face. We're supposed to be staying home. We are supposed to be isolating ourselves. We're supposed to keep our social bubbles small and not be congregating in large groups. That goes against our natural inclination, and that takes some control out of our life, and that doesn't feel good. A lack of control actually reads as stress in a person, and so we've got these things that are hard for us going on. What do you do with that? Well, the question is, what can you control? Viktor Frankl is a psychologist who went through concentration camps way back when. And he said a lot of profound things when he came out. One of the things that he said was, you can strip away a lot of the rights of people, a lot of those things, but there's something you cannot strip away, and that's the right to choose what you're going to think or how you're going to think about that. I have that ability. I can control what I'm going to think about. And so I can think about that I don't have any control or whatever, or I can choose to look at it, control how I'm going to think in the sense of, I'm going to make the very best out of this. I'm going to learn everything that I can out of this. So that's control. There is at least that we can control. So we want to be aware of that. The second thing is commitment. Senseless suffering is so hard for us to look at. It just, when it makes no sense, people suffer more. They struggle more. When purpose comes in, somehow it seems to bring in hope, brings in perspective, it brings in meaning, and we like to have meaning. One of the steps after a person has been traumatized is to make meaning, and they have to refigure out stuff after you've had this trauma. So having a commitment to something is really important. So the question is, what are you committed to? Are you committed to family? Are you committed to your work? Are you committed to those things you volunteer for? Are you committed to your faith? What is it that you're committed to? Having that sense of commitment is actually going to increase your sense of well-being and protect you from health breakdown. And the third thing is a challenge. So I'm just going to point to this really quick here. This is the anxiety curve. I'm going to come back to it in a while. But it looks, if you look at it, it looks strikingly like the beginning of a roller coaster. I happen to love roller coasters. And so when I get on a roller coaster, I just love the ups and the downs. And so when we're on that our family loves roller coasters. We'll do whole days of just finding a park that has lots of roller coasters when we go on vacation. And so we'll get on those things and we'll start to ride. And I get to a place when we've done, I don't know, about 20 rides in a day, you get to know the roller coasters, and I'll get to a place where I almost feel like I'm steering it. Here we're going upside down, here we're doing a corkscrew, and there's that sense of, I know where I'm going, I'm getting there. Not everybody likes being on a roller coaster. And I don't know why people that don't like them would go on them, but I've seen people on them that don't like them. And while my stance is kind of like this, anticipating and wanting to go there, I see other people who are just like, wow, this is really scary, I want off. And I'm thinking, why'd you get on in the first place? And they're having a terrible experience. What's the difference? The difference is in perspective. I'm leaning into the roller coaster. They're leaning out and feeling out of control. It's two very different things. Another example of that is if I'm climbing a mountain. And I have two ways I can climb a mountain. So I can be climbing a mountain kind of going, oh, this is so hard. I don't want to do this. I don't know if I can get all the way to the top. And I have a terrible time. I struggle all the way up. Climbing a mountain is hard for either perspective, but if I have the perspective of I am going to do one step after another, till I get to the top of the mountain, the person that is going to come out of that mentally in a better space is the person that is saying, this mountain is hard, but I'm going to get to the top. rather than this mountain is hard and I think it's going to damage me and I'm don't know if I can make it. It's just a very different perspective. So they've found in the hardy personality or a resilient person that when I can say this is hard but I'm going to do it, I tend to fare better mentally and physically. So those are the three: sense of control, being aware of what I can control. Second is the sense of commitment. This is not senseless. I will find a purpose, figure out what it is that I'm going to be committed to and challenge. I'm going to look at this as a challenge rather than a threat to myself. Is that easy to do? No. And sometimes we need someone to come alongside us and help us to gain perspective. That's why I do what I do. I work with people that have been through some of these really hard things. And when I come alongside them, I want to say, what are we going to do? How do we get you into the best place to go through this as best as you can? I'm not stopping the suffering, but I'm helping them to get through in a more protected kind of way. Okay, so to just back up and take a general look at mental health. Mental health can take on all of life. It impacts us in just about any way that I can think of. So clearly, mental health impacts us emotionally. Going through mental health stuff feels awful. I can be really blue, really anxious. That ends up going into the physical. So when I get really anxious, I end up feeling nauseous or if I'm experiencing good mental health, I feel great. If I'm getting a little too far on the other end, I feel too great, and I end up doing things that aren't helpful for me. So it affects us emotionally. It also affects us cognitively. So a really good example of that is how anxiety affects us cognitively. Depression can make the foggy brain and the lack of concentration. Particularly with anxiety, it can happen with depression. I have the emotional core right in the center of my brain that kind of kicks up. So if this was my brain right here, this right here in the front, that's called the frontal lobe, which is a really logical thing. In the center, where the apple seeds would be of an apple, that's called the limbic system. That's our fear center. That's our emotional center. So that's quite lit up. Whether I'm struggling with anxiety or depression, particularly those two, bipolar, it's kind of going back and forth. But when that limbic system is firing up and the emotions are starting to get really big, what happens to the frontal lobe is it just goes out on you. And the limbic system takes over. When I work with people, I'll have people say to me, I know it's not logical, but this is how I feel. Or I just can't. I sit and look at a screen for 6 hours and I can't get a thing done. I hear those kind of things. The frontal lobe goes out. It has an impact on our cognitive function, on how we're able to function. It impacts us physically. So those things are things like fatigue. I run out of energy. I struggle to sleep. When I struggle to sleep, fatigue increases. Both of them are there, but they kind of exacerbate each other. Appetite changes. People will have, with depression, people will have unexplained change of weight, up or down. It can go in either direction. Our bodies are affected. Physically, we're affected. And then you start to have the impact of everything affecting everything. So when I stop sleeping, my emotions go, my mood goes down, or the anxiety goes up, or I can't think straight because I'm just so tired. So they just start to mingle with each other. That's how the snowball can get bigger and bigger and bigger as those things kind of exacerbate each other. Then you add relationally to the mix. It's funny how when I'm in a bad mood, everybody else is more obnoxious. That's not actually what it is, right? When I'm in a bad mood, I'm just thinking differently. And so relationally, things start to suffer. My relationships start to suffer. I start to, even if the relationship itself is not suffering, perhaps I start to feel more anxious. So mental health affects us relationally. And spiritually, we're affected too. I just lose sight of those things that are important to me. So I no longer have that strong sense of faith that just comes easy, and then I have to choose that sense of faith. That's where it helps me that I have faith in someone that's much bigger, because then it's not dependent on me. So those are the way that mental health impacts us, and there's probably other ways, but I think we've covered almost every way that you can be impacted. I want to talk about a couple of important things when it comes to mental health. These are things that underneath helps us to just have a higher sense of well-being. So the first one is kind of two. It's a sense of significance and a sense of security. Significance says it matters that I'm alive. Whether I'm good at anything or not, whatever I'm doing, whether I am talking to one person or 1,000 people, I am significant. It just matters that I'm alive. When somebody has grown up in a situation or lived in some kind of situation that has threatened that sense of being significant in the world, that has a negative impact on mental health. Sense that I'm important. I'm just important to somebody, or it's just important that I'm alive, that I'm here. I have some kind of attachment. Now we're getting a little bit more into the security piece. So there's a sense of attachment that somebody cares about me, that I care about somebody. They've done studies on monkeys and found that actually when they are not touched, they will die. So we know that from a very young age, we need a sense of attachment. And attachment itself is set right around 18 months, in that first year and a half of life. And so at that age, that is life or death. It's survival. And so if that does not get well established, that lack of attachment can actually go right into adulthood and affect the significant relationships that we have in our life. So, and it affects us so much because it's from a life or death kind of basis that we have life or death kind of threat. We can have reactions that make no sense to us because of what their source was. And so just to kind of dip into that just a little bit, starting to build relationships where I know that I'm loved unconditionally make a big difference to us. Whether I know that spiritually or I know that relationally, that will help me with mental health, the sense of significance and security. You matter and you have a place in this world. That's what those two things say. Authenticity is also important to our mental health. Brené Brown she calls herself a vulnerability researcher, and she talks a lot about vulnerability, authenticity, shame, and how authenticity and vulnerability actually will counteract shame as long as it's handled right. She says so much more than that I can't give it justice. She's written some books and does some TED Talks, and they're well worth watching or reading. But authenticity gives me a chance to be known. There is something powerful and something healthy about just being known for who I really am and being loved as that person. So being known. It's also safe to be me. When I lead small groups, at the beginning of these groups, if I really want people to really be sharing at an authentic level, I will sit down with them in the first meeting and say, what do you need to feel safe in this group? And every time, there's lots of things that come out, like confidentiality, stuff like that, but every time somebody is going to say, I need to know that I'm not going to be judged in this group, that I'm going to be accepted for who I am. I need to feel safe to be myself. That's acceptance. It's non-judgmental. So that's an important piece of authenticity. And so we have to choose carefully where we're going to be authentic so that we have safe experiences and we know that we can be authentic in those places. I also need to know that it's safe to be vulnerable. So same kind of idea. I don't have to fear judgment, and I'm not going to get advice handed to me, or I'm not going to get people looking, well, that's judgment, people looking down on me. I just need to know that it's safe to be vulnerable. That is an important part of authenticity. And I am loved. I don't have to sacrifice who I am. I don't have to sacrifice what I need to survive. I'm just loved. I'm just valued. So those are 3 important things in mental health: significance, security, and authenticity. Being able to be me, being loved for who I am, not judged, and have safety to be vulnerable in situations. Another important piece of mental health is given to us by Carl Rogers, who is one of kind of the classic theorists of psychology. Carl Rogers said a lot of things, and actually a lot of the things that he said fits with the last slide. In terms of safety and the atmosphere that is created. When we create that kind of an atmosphere, people tend to lean more into growth. But I want to go into another part of what he talked about, and it's congruence. And he talked about 3 things really that fit together. 2 major players are the ideal self and the actual self, but self-image also can play a really important role in this. So self-image is about the way that I see myself. I can see myself as a hard worker. I can see myself as a kind, as a compassionate person. I can see all kinds of traits that I think about in myself. Those are all positive traits. And we don't only think about ourselves in positive traits. Sometimes I think I'm just difficult to get along with. I might think that I'm a loser. Somebody might think that they are a nuisance. That's all your self-image. That's how you see yourself. Then there's the ideal self. That is what I think I should be. What I think I'd like to be. So that might be, I think that I need to be a kind person all the time. Or if I'm the ideal mother, I never ever yell at my kids. I never ever lose my cool. I never ever feel a negative feeling. That's the ideal self. And it can be in regard to as a mother, it can be as a worker, as a father, as a child, as a teen, as a friend. It can be in regard to a lot of different things, but we have that ideal self. And then the actual self is how I actually am in the world. And so I see myself loving my kids, or being a good friend, or being a bad friend, or being inconsistent. So those 3 things, when they are far apart, the farther apart they are, the less congruence I have. The less congruence I have, the more angst I'm going to have, basically. So both ways. So I want to give you an example of incongruence. Here it is. With incongruence, I might believe that the ideal person is always kind and always smiling. The ideal self that I think I should be is never cranky, just always on my A game, always being the best that I can be. The actual self is that I have good days and I have bad days. There are days where I'm on my A game, but there's other days where I'm just kind of cranky, or I'm just not feeling on top of things. That's the actual how it goes. And then we have self-image that plays into this. And self-image might say, if I'm not always kind and loving and smiling, if I'm ever cranky, then I'm a terrible person. My self-image would say that. And because I think that I'm way too often a cranky person or not smiling, I'm therefore a terrible person, and things go out of perspective for us. When I have those 3 things going on, those are far away from each other, right? I have good days and bad days. I'm cranky way too often, making myself a terrible person. But what I should be is kind and always nice. Those are far apart. And so as one of the things that I do with people as I'm working with them is I try to work to pull them back together. There's a couple ways that we can do that. The actual self, I think, is just how we're going to be. We can do things to impact what we actually are by, 1, taking care of ourselves. If I'm getting enough sleep, I'm way less likely to be cranky. If I'm physically getting exercise, I'm way more likely to be cheerful because the right chemicals are rolling in my system. So we can do things spiritually. I can keep myself in a calmer place and take those times of finding that peace. So there's things that I can do that can actually help me with my actual self. So that is one place where I can work. Another place where I can work, and actually it's all three of them, I can work on my ideal self. So perhaps a little bit more realistic view. I can say, everybody, well, there it is. I can have good days and I can have bad days. And even if I'm cranky, that's okay. So the ideal self, I can adjust what I expect of myself to be that ideal person. And then self-image, I'm kind of adjusting my assessment of me. So if my ideal self is changing to be a little bit more reasonable, a little bit more what a human being can do, my self-image can then start to change, and I can say, if I'm not like I would like to be with people, I'd like to be kind and smiling and loving all the time. If I'm not hitting that self, it doesn't mean I'm a terrible person. It means I'm a struggling person, or it means I'm human. Perhaps I can say that. As we can pull those closer together with those adjustments, that helps us with just a greater sense of well-being. It helps to pull back on the angst. So all of those things that I've talked about, the significance, security, authenticity, the type B personality, that resilience, all of that impacts how we experience and respond to stressors, which is going to lead me into talking a little about stress, burnout. We'll ride the roller coaster towards anxiety and then talk about depression eventually.
Thank you for joining us for this mental health session. If you want more information on mental health and free resources and videos, go ahead and click the subscription button below. And we will be updating this channel regularly with professional counselors and psychologists coming in to give you mental health information. Additionally, if you're struggling with the topic discussed in this video, there is a link in the description box below. If you click that, it will link you into our website, and you can scroll down to the contact button. The contact button will pull up an email where you can contact us, and we will begin to work with you in seeking out the helps that you need for whatever it is that you're facing. We'll look at getting you counseling, treatment, whatever it is. We want to help you on your journey to better mental health.